You don't rise to the level of talent. You fall to the level of your training. The metal floor rang softly beneath Ethan Cole's boots as he stepped back into position, shoulders squared, breath measured at 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The recycled air of the hangar tasting faintly of ozone and cold steel, while the overhead lights flickered in a steady rhythm that matched the quiet pulse in his ears. He lifted the rifle again, not aiming at anything real, just a painted mark exactly 25 yards away. A dull gray circle on reinforced plating, and he moved, slow, deliberate, precise, checking his stance, adjusting his grip by fractions of an inch, resetting his footing as if the world might end if he got it wrong, then lowering it, then raising it again, until the motion stopped being something he thought about and became something his body simply knew, while a tall figure stood at the far edge of the room, half hidden in shadow, watching with narrowed golden eyes that reflected the sterile light like polished glass. Kalira Voss did not move, did not blink, her luminous blue skin catching the faint glow as she leaned one shoulder against the cold wall, arms folded, posture relaxed in a way that only someone born into strength could afford. And after a long moment, she exhaled through her nose, something close to amusement flickering across her expression as Ethan reset for what had to be the 100th repetition, then the 200th, then the 300th. The sound of his boots and the quiet mechanical click of his weapon becoming a pattern she could predict, a rhythm she found almost inefficient. Her species did not train like this, did not repeat failure until it dulled into routine. They adapted, evolved, relied on instinct sharpened by generations of conflict, and to her, what she was seeing looked less like preparation and more like a ritual. Human stubbornness disguised as discipline. She stepped forward at last, her height casting a long shadow across the floor as she approached, the faint hum of her armor whispering with each movement. And Ethan didn't look up, didn't break rhythm, just completed the motion one more time before lowering the rifle and glancing toward her with a calm that felt almost out of place in a room built for war. "You've been doing that for over an hour," she said, her voice low, measured, carrying a weight that didn't need to be raised to command attention, and Ethan shrugged slightly, rolling his shoulder as if loosening a muscle that had long since stopped complaining. "Closer to 2. He replied, simple, unbothered, already resetting his stance. Kalira tilted her head, studying him like a puzzle that refused to justify its own existence. "For a situation that may never occur," she said, and there was no malice in it, just certainty, the kind that came from a lifetime of being right. Ethan paused then, just for a fraction of a second, the smallest break in his rhythm, before he lifted the rifle again, sight aligning with the mark without hesitation. "That's the point," he said quietly, and the weapon steadied in his hands as if it had always belonged there. Kalira watched him pull the motion through to completion, flawless, controlled, almost inevitable. And for the briefest moment, something shifted behind her eyes, not understanding. Not yet, but the first faint crack in certainty, like a surface that had never been tested, while Ethan lowered the rifle once more and reset, already beginning again, as if the future were something he could meet halfway, one repetition at a time. The sound of the rifle settling into position came softer now, almost invisible beneath the low hum of the hangar, as if Ethan Cole had learned how to move without disturbing the air itself. And Kalira Voss found that detail more unsettling than anything else because it did not match strength, it did not match speed, it matched something else entirely, something quieter and harder to define. She stepped closer, boots barely making a sound against the metal floor, watching the minute adjustments in his posture, the way his shoulders aligned before his hands moved, the way his breathing never changed even when his muscles should have been burning. And for the first time she noticed that he was not reacting to the target at all. He was positioning himself before the motion even began, as if the action had already happened somewhere inside him and he was simply catching up to it. "Show me," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the steady rhythm without raising in volume, and Ethan lowered the rifle again, glancing at her with a brief flicker of curiosity before stepping aside, offering the space without comment. Kalira did not hesitate, stepping into position with the confidence of someone who had never needed to doubt her own capability, her grip firm, her stance naturally powerful, every movement efficient by her standards, and she lifted the weapon in a single smooth motion, aligning it with the distant mark in less than a second. For a moment, everything was still, then she lowered it again, expression unchanged. "Adequate," she said, handing it back, but Ethan did not take it, not immediately, his eyes studying her stance in silence, not judging, not correcting, simply observing in a way that felt strangely precise. "Again," he said, and there was no authority in his tone, just certainty, and something about that made her narrow her eyes slightly before repeating the motion, faster this time, sharper, more decisive, and again she lowered it, expecting acknowledgement, but instead Ethan shook his head once, almost imperceptibly. "Too late," he said. The words hung there, simple, unadorned, and Kalira felt a flicker of irritation, not because she did not understand them, but because she did, and she did not like what they implied. "There was no delay," she replied, her voice calm but edged with challenge, and Ethan stepped forward then, closing the distance just enough to reach out and adjust her footing by half an inch, his touch brief and precise, then tapping lightly against the side of the rifle. "You moved after you decided," he said, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "You should already be moving before that." Kalira held his stare for a moment, golden eyes steady, searching for arrogance and finding none, only a quiet conviction that refused to bend, and she reset her stance again, slower now, more deliberate, trying to feel what he meant instead of dismissing it, lifting the rifle once more, but this time she hesitated for a fraction of a second, a space where instinct met uncertainty, and when she lowered it, she felt it. Barely, but enough. A delay she had never noticed before. Ethan nodded once, not in approval, just in acknowledgement, and stepped back, giving her the space again as if this was no longer his demonstration but hers. The hangar seemed quieter now, the distant systems humming in low, steady patterns, and Kalira exhaled slowly, resetting her stance for a third time, then a fourth, each movement slightly different, slightly more controlled, yet still not matching what she had seen in him, and for the first time in her life, the thought crossed her mind uninvited and unwelcome, not as doubt, but as a question she could not immediately answer. What if strength was not the first step, but the last? The fifth attempt was quieter, not in sound but in intention, as Kalira Voss adjusted her stance with deliberate care, her luminous blue skin catching the dim overhead light, while her golden eyes remained fixed on the distant mark exactly 25 yards away. And this time she did not rush, did not rely on instinct alone, instead letting the moment stretch just long enough to feel the space between decision and movement, a space she had never acknowledged before. Ethan Cole stood a few feet behind her, silent, arms relaxed at his sides, watching not the rifle but the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her weight shifted across her feet, the rhythm of her breathing that was still too sharp, too reactive, like a storm waiting to break instead of a current already flowing. "Do not aim," he said, his voice low, almost blending into the hum of the hangar, and Kalira frowned slightly, her grip tightening by instinct. "Then what is the purpose?" she replied, not turning, her tone steady but edged with restrained frustration, and Ethan stepped closer, not enough to invade her space, just enough that his presence could be felt rather than seen. "You are waiting for the moment to begin," he said, but it already started. The words settled into the air with an unusual weight, and Kalira inhaled slowly, her chest rising and falling as she tried to understand what could not be measured, what could not be seen on any battlefield display or tactical readout, and for the first time she lowered the rifle before completing the motion, her gaze shifting slightly as she considered the invisible timing he was describing. She reset again, slower now, her posture less rigid, her attention no longer locked on the target, but on the sequence before it, the subtle alignment of her body, the angle of her feet, the way her breath settled into something smoother, more controlled, and when she raised the rifle again, the movement felt different, not faster, not stronger, but earlier, as if it had begun before she gave it permission. Ethan watched closely, his expression unchanged, but there was a faint shift in his stance, a recognition rather than approval, and when she completed the motion this time, lowering the rifle with a quiet exhale, he gave a single nod. Kalira remained still for a moment, the the weapon resting in her hands as she processed the difference, small yet undeniable, and something unfamiliar stirred beneath her composure. Not pride, not satisfaction, but a quiet awareness that what she had dismissed as repetition was something far more precise, something that shaped action before it existed. "This is inefficient," she said after a moment, though her voice lacked the certainty it once carried. And Ethan almost smiled, just a faint shift at the corner of his mouth that disappeared as quickly as it came. "It is," he agreed, and stepped back again, giving her space as if the lesson no longer belonged to him. "Until it is not." The hangar lights flickered once, a brief fluctuation that cast shifting shadows across the floor, and for a moment everything felt suspended, as if the world itself had paused between movements. And Kilira adjusted her grip once more, raising the rifle again without hesitation, her body moving with a timing that felt less forced, less reactive, and more anticipated. Somewhere deep within, a realization began to take shape, quiet but persistent, that perhaps strength was not what defined survival, but the ability to arrive at the moment before it demanded anything at all. And as she lowered the rifle again, her gaze flickered toward Ethan, not with skepticism this time, but with something far more dangerous, respect beginning to form before it was fully understood. The hangar did not change, but something inside it had shifted, as if the air itself carried a different weight, and Kilira Voss stood in the center of it, rifle lowered at her side, her breathing steady in a way it had never been before, not because she had forced it, but because it had settled on its own. Ethan Cole moved past her without a word, stepping toward a nearby equipment rack, his movements unhurried, almost casual. Yet every step landed with quiet precision, like he was still training even when he was not, and that detail caught her attention more than anything else. "You never stop," she said, turning slightly to follow him with her gaze, and he reached for a canteen, taking a measured sip before answering. "You do not either," he replied, setting it back exactly where it had been, not an inch off, not a second delayed. Kilira studied him, her golden eyes narrowing just slightly, not in suspicion, but in calculation. "My people train for strength," she said, her voice calm. "For speed, for endurance, but not this." She gestured subtly toward the empty space where he had been standing, the repetition that still echoed there like a ghost of motion. Ethan leaned lightly against the rack, arms resting at his sides, considering her words for a moment before responding. "Strength fails," he said simply. "Speed fades, endurance breaks, but timing." He paused, not searching for the word, but allowing it to settle. "Timing does not ask for permission." The sentence lingered in the quiet hum of the hangar, and Kilira felt it land somewhere deeper than she expected, not as a challenge, but as a truth she had not tested. She stepped forward again, returning to the position she had claimed earlier, her boots aligning with the faint scuff marks on the floor left by hours of repetition, and she lifted the rifle once more, not because she was told to, but because something inside her now demanded an answer. This time, she did not think about the target, did not measure the distance, did not rely on instinct to guide her, instead letting her body settle first, letting the sequence begin before her mind tried to control it. And when she moved, it felt almost quiet, like a current flowing beneath the surface rather than a force pushing against it. Ethan watched from the side, his gaze steady, not intervening, not correcting, and when she completed the motion, lowering the rifle with a slow exhale, he gave a slight nod, not approval, not praise, just recognition. Kilira remained still, her grip loosening slightly as she processed the shift, and for the first time, she noticed something she had overlooked before, not in him, but in herself. A hesitation that no longer came from uncertainty, but from awareness, the understanding that every fraction of a second mattered in ways she had never needed to consider. "This would not matter in controlled combat," she said, though her tone lacked conviction, and Ethan pushed off the rack, stepping closer again, his presence calm, grounded. "There is no controlled combat," he replied, meeting her gaze directly. "Only moments you prepared for, and moments you did not." The words settled between them, and for a brief second, the distant systems flickered again, a low hum shifting pitch, subtle but noticeable, and both of them felt it, not as a threat, but as a reminder that the world beyond the hangar did not wait for anyone to be ready. Kilira lowered the rifle completely this time. Her posture still strong, still composed, but different now, as if something rigid had begun to bend, and she looked at Ethan again, not with skepticism, not with dismissal, but with a quiet, measured focus. "Then we will see," she said, her voice steady, and Ethan gave a small nod, turning away without another word, as if the answer did not belong to either of them yet, but to something that had not happened and was already on its way. The shift came without warning, not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle change in the hum of the station as the overhead lights dimmed for half a second before stabilizing again, and Ethan Cole stopped mid-step, not because of the flicker, but because of the timing of it, his eyes lifting slightly, as if listening to something no one else had noticed. Kilira Voss felt it a moment later, not through sound, but through the way the air seemed to tighten, her posture straightening instinctively as her gaze swept the hangar, searching for a visible cause and finding none. Only the same steel walls, the same quiet rows of equipment, the same controlled environment that suddenly did not feel as controlled as it should. "A fluctuation," she said, her voice calm, though her eyes remained alert, and Ethan nodded once. Already moving toward a nearby console, his steps measured, not rushed. His attention focused on the small details most would ignore, the slight delay in the system response, the faint lag in the display as it updated, the kind of things that meant nothing until they did. "Power grid is compensating," he said, more to himself than to her, his fingers brushing lightly across the interface as if confirming something he already expected, and Kilira stepped closer, her presence steady at his side. "This station is fortified," she replied. "It does not fail without cause." Ethan glanced at her briefly, then back at the console. "Exactly," said, and that single word carried more weight than any alarm could have. The silence that followed was not empty. It was waiting, stretching just long enough to feel unnatural, and Kilira felt it again, that subtle shift in timing, not in the systems, but in herself, the awareness that something had already begun even if it had not revealed itself yet. Ethan stepped away from the console then, his movements deliberate, scanning the hangar with a calm that did not match the tension building in the air, and he reached for his rifle without hesitation, not raising it, not aiming, just holding it as if it belonged in his hands before anything required it. Kilira watched him, her own instincts responding a fraction of a second later, her grip tightening around her weapon as she mirrored his readiness. But she noticed the difference immediately. He had moved before the moment demanded it, and she had followed after. "You sense something," she said, not as a question, and Ethan shook his head slightly. "No," he replied, his gaze steady. "I just do not wait for proof." The words settled into her thoughts with quiet intensity, and she adjusted her stance without thinking, aligning herself not with the environment, but with him, matching his positioning, his angle, his readiness, and for the first time, it did not feel like imitation, it felt like understanding. Another flicker passed through the lights, longer this time, and the hum of the station shifted again, a fraction lower, a fraction slower, and somewhere in the distance, a system recalibrated with a soft, delayed response that confirmed what neither of them needed to say. Kilira exhaled slowly, her breathing controlled, her posture steady, but her awareness sharper than it had ever been, and she realized something that would have been unthinkable only hours before. That preparation was not about expecting danger. It was about refusing to be surprised by it. Ethan adjusted his footing slightly, a small movement that aligned him with a line of sight that had not yet been tested, and Kilira followed, not out of instinct, but by choice, her body moving earlier than it ever had before, and as the silence stretched once more, heavier now, charged with something unseen, she understood that whatever was coming had already begun, and for the first time, she was not waiting for it to arrive. The station exhaled a low, unfamiliar tone, not an alarm, not yet, but something deeper, a system recognizing a change it could not immediately correct, and Ethan Cole tilted his head slightly, as if listening to a rhythm that had fallen out of place, while Kilira Voss stood beside him, her posture steady but no longer rigid, her awareness stretching beyond what her eyes could confirm. The lights dimmed again, longer this time, casting elongated shadows across the hangar floor and the hum. Beneath their feet shifted half a beat slower, subtle enough that most would miss it. But not them. Not anymore. Ethan moved first, not toward cover, not toward the exits, but toward a narrow corridor along the left wall, a path that had remained empty and used, insignificant until now. And Kalira followed without hesitation, her steps aligning with his before her instincts could argue against it. "Why there?" she asked, her voice low, controlled, and Ethan did not look back. "Because it will matter in 5 seconds," he replied, and there was no urgency in his tone, only certainty, the kind that did not need explanation. They reached the corridor just as a distant section of the hangar sealed itself off with a soft, delayed hiss, not violent, not abrupt, just late, and Kalira felt it immediately, that fraction of time where reaction would have been too slow, where standing where she had been would have placed her in the wrong moment entirely. She glanced at Ethan, her golden eyes narrowing, not in doubt, but in recognition, and for the first time, she understood that he was not predicting events, he was positioning himself before they revealed their importance. Another shift rolled through the station, this time accompanied by a faint vibration that traveled through the metal floor, subtle but deliberate, like a system trying to stabilize something beyond its control, and Ethan adjusted his stance again, aligning himself with the corridor's edge, his rifle steady but not raised, his breathing unchanged, and Kalira mirrored him, not out of imitation, but because her body had begun to accept the timing he operated within. "Your systems are compensating," she said quietly, her gaze scanning the dimming lights, and Ethan nodded once. "They are trying to catch up," he replied. But something already moved ahead of them. The words settled into the space between them, and Kalira felt a new awareness settle into her posture. Not tension, not fear, but readiness shaped by something deeper than instinct, something learned in moments rather than inherited through generations. The corridor remained silent, but the silence was no longer empty. It carried weight, direction, intention, and for the first time, Kalira did not wait for it to break. She adjusted before it could, shifting her footing slightly, aligning her position with a line of sight that had not yet been tested, and Ethan noticed, just a brief glance, a small nod, acknowledgement without words. Somewhere deeper in the station, a system recalibrated again, slower this time, and the lights flickered once more before stabilizing at a lower intensity, and Kalira exhaled softly, her breathing matching the steady rhythm Ethan had never lost. "This is not strength," she said, almost to herself, and Ethan responded without hesitation, "No," his voice quiet, certain. "It is what you do before strength is needed." The corridor stretched ahead, dim and silent, but no longer uncertain, and as they stood there, positioned before the moment revealed itself, Kalira realized something that would change everything that came after. That survival did not belong to the fastest or the strongest, but to those who arrived before the world decided to move. The silence broke without sound, a subtle shift in pressure that made the air feel thinner, tighter, as if the station itself had taken a breath and forgotten how to release it. And Ethan Cole moved before anything changed, stepping forward into the corridor with a measured pace that did not match urgency, but anticipated it, his rifle steady at his side, his eyes scanning not for movement, but for absence, for the small details that no longer aligned. Kalira Voss followed a half-step behind, then corrected it instantly, matching his position without needing to think, her body adjusting earlier than it would have moments ago, and she felt it, that difference, that quiet edge of readiness that did not come from instinct, but from choosing to move before the moment asked her to. The lights dimmed further, settling into a low, steady glow that stretched shadows along the corridor walls, and the hum beneath their feet shifted again, uneven now, like a rhythm that had lost its pattern. And Ethan paused at the intersection ahead, not because he needed to decide, but because he had already decided and was waiting for the world to confirm it. "Something is ahead," Kalira said, her voice low, controlled, but this time it was not a reaction. It was an observation made before certainty, and Ethan gave a slight nod. "It already passed through," he replied, and stepped to the side, aligning himself with the edge of the corridor just as a distant panel slid closed with a soft, delayed response that echoed faintly through the structure. Kalira's eyes narrowed, her awareness sharpening. As she tracked the sequence, the timing, the pattern of systems falling just behind where they should be. And for the first time, she did not look for the cause. She looked for the path it had taken, adjusting her stance accordingly, positioning herself not where she was safe, but where she would be safe next. Another shift rolled through the station, deeper this time, a vibration that traveled through the walls and into her bones, and Ethan moved again. One step, then another, each placement deliberate, each angle chosen before it was needed. And Kalira followed, her movements no longer trailing his but beginning alongside them, her timing closing the gap that had existed between instinct and preparation. "You are not reacting," she said quietly, more to herself than to him, and Ethan's response came without hesitation. "I am responding early," he said, his voice calm, grounded, as if the distinction was the only thing that mattered. The corridor narrowed slightly ahead, the light dimming further as secondary systems took over, and Kalira felt the space compress, not physically, but in possibility, every option tightening into fewer, more precise paths, and she adjusted before it forced her to, shifting her footing, angling her body, preparing for a moment that had not yet revealed itself. Ethan glanced at her then, just briefly, and there was something in that look, not surprise, not approval, but recognition, the acknowledgement that she had crossed a threshold he had never needed to explain. The station exhaled again, a low, uneven tone that carried through the metal like a warning too subtle to alarm, and Kalira steadied her breath, her posture aligned with the corridor ahead, her awareness no longer searching for what was wrong, but for what would happen next. And as they moved forward together, not faster, not stronger, but earlier, she realized that whatever had entered this place was not the most dangerous thing in the corridor, because for the first time, she was no longer waiting to meet it. The corridor bent slightly to the right, a subtle architectural curve designed to guide movement without forcing it, and Ethan Cole slowed just enough to let the space reveal its timing, his steps landing with quiet certainty as if he had already walked this path before, while Kalira Voss matched him without hesitation, her posture aligned, her breathing steady, her awareness no longer chasing the moment, but arriving ahead of it. The lights dimmed again, settling into a low amber glow that painted the metal walls in long, soft shadows, and the hum of the station dropped another fraction, uneven now, like a system struggling to keep pace with something it could not fully track. Ethan stopped near a narrow junction, not at the center, but slightly offset, positioning himself where the lines of sight overlapped, where movement would be seen before it was understood, and Kalira mirrored him instinctively, her body adjusting before her mind questioned it, her stance angled, her weight balanced, her focus no longer fixed on what was visible, but on what was about to become visible. "Here," she said quietly, not asking, not guessing, but recognizing the shape of the moment before it arrived, and Ethan gave a single nod, his eyes scanning the edges of the corridor, the faint reflections on the metal surfaces, the subtle inconsistencies in the light that suggested something had passed through this space seconds earlier. A panel along the far wall shifted slightly, not opening, not closing, just settling into place a fraction too late, and Kalira felt it immediately, that delayed response, that small misalignment that marked the boundary between control and disruption. She adjusted her footing before the next shift came, stepping half an inch to the left, aligning her position with a line of movement that had not yet revealed itself, and Ethan noticed, not with surprise, but with quiet acknowledgement, the kind that did not need to be spoken. The station exhaled again, a low, uneven tone that carried through the structure like a signal without a source, and the air tightened for just a moment, a brief compression that made every detail sharper, every sound clearer, and Kalira moved before it resolved, her body shifting into readiness, not because something had happened, but because it was about to. Ethan raised his rifle slightly, not aiming, not reacting, just bringing it into position as if it belonged there before the moment required it. And Kalira did the same, her movements synchronized not by instruction, but by understanding. "You feel it now," Ethan said, his voice low, steady, and Kalira did not look at him, her golden eyes fixed on the corridor ahead. "It is not feeling," she replied, her tone calm, precise, It is knowing when the moment begins. The words settled between them, and for a brief second, the station seemed to hold its breath, the hum flattening into a near silence that stretched just long enough to become noticeable. And then, somewhere ahead, something shifted again, not loud, not visible, but undeniable. Kalira moved first this time, one step forward, her position adjusting before the change could reach her, and Ethan followed half a beat behind, not correcting, not leading, but allowing the shift, allowing her to arrive before him. And for the first time, the timing between them reversed, not by accident, but by choice. The corridor remained dim, the system still struggling to stabilize, but the space no longer felt uncertain. It felt mapped, anticipated, understood, and as they stood there, aligned with a moment that had not yet fully revealed itself, Kalira realized something that could not be undone, that the difference between surviving and falling was not measured in strength or speed, but in the distance between when something happened and when you were already there. The corridor settled into a quiet that no longer felt uncertain, but resolved, as if the station had finally revealed the shape of what had been moving through it. And Ethan Cole lowered his rifle by a fraction, not relaxing, but acknowledging that the moment they had prepared for had already passed its most dangerous point, while Kalira Voss remained still for a heartbeat longer, her golden eyes fixed ahead, tracking the final echoes of misalignment in the systems, the last delayed responses, correcting themselves one by one until the hum beneath their feet returned to a steady, even rhythm. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering just slightly, not from relief, but from recognition, and when she turned to Ethan, there was no trace of the skepticism she had carried before, only a quiet clarity that had replaced it. "It is over," she said, her voice calm, measured, and Ethan nodded once, not looking at her, his gaze still scanning the corridor, as if confirming something only he could see. "The part that matters is," he replied, and that distinction lingered in the air between them, subtle but precise. The lights stabilized fully now, the amber glow returning to a neutral white, shadows retreating into clean lines along the walls, and the station resumed its normal rhythm. But Kalira did not. Her posture remained aligned, her awareness still extended beyond the present moment, as if she had learned something her body refused to forget. She looked down at her hands for a brief second, flexing her fingers around the grip of her weapon, feeling the difference not in strength, but in timing, in the absence of hesitation that had once been invisible to her. "You moved before it happened," she said, lifting her gaze back to Ethan. And this time it was not an observation, it was a conclusion. Ethan finally turned toward her, his expression unchanged, steady as always. "No," he said quietly. "I moved because it was going to happen." The words settled deeper than anything he had said before, and Kalira felt them take hold, not as instruction, but as something she had already begun to understand. She stepped forward then, not toward the corridor ahead, but toward the space where they had first aligned themselves, placing her feet with deliberate care, her posture precise, her breathing steady, and, for a moment, she closed her eyes, not in rest, but in focus, replaying the sequence, the timing, the subtle shifts she had learned to recognize. When she opened them again, she moved, one step, then another, adjusting her position before the moment asked her to, her body arriving ahead of her thoughts, and Ethan watched, silent, his gaze following the movement with quiet attention. She stopped after a few steps, turning slightly toward him, and there was something new in her expression now. Not pride, not certainty, but something far more grounded. "This is not instinct," she said, her voice steady. "It is choice, repeated until it becomes truth." Ethan gave a small nod, the faintest hint of approval finally visible, and for a brief second, the distance between them felt different, not teacher and observer, not human and alien, but two individuals standing in the same understanding. The station remained calm around them, systems stable, lights steady. The moment fully passed, but Kalira did not return to who she had been before it. She remained where she was, aligned with something that extended beyond the present. And as the silence settled once more, she realized that what she had witnessed was not the absence of danger, but the presence of preparation, something invisible, something quiet, something that had changed the outcome before it ever needed to be seen. And in that realization, she understood the final truth he had never needed to say, that he had not survived because he was stronger or faster, but because long before the moment arrived, he had already been there.